So with that, I'm going to introduce Steve Smith, Executive Director, to say a few intro words. Steve, over to you.
Yep, thanks, Maggie, and thanks everybody for joining. It's with great excitement that we're releasing our third annual energy efficiency in the Southeast report. And this is clearly more important than ever. As we all know, energy efficiency is a great way to be part of a clean energy portfolio, helping to reduce the greenest electron is the electron that you never use. And so energy efficiency is that. It helps folks not only reduce the amount of power and emissions that, that we have, but it also is a great way to save money on everyone's bills. And in a pandemic, this is even more important than ever. There's a lot of people that are struggling. There's a lot of people that need an extra boost to work through with the economic downturn that we've experienced during the pandemic. So having leadership on the part of our utilities to really provide innovative and successful programs to all their customers, but particularly low and moderate income customers in this time of a pandemic crisis is critically important. So not all the utilities in the Southeast are created equal. We're seeing some leadership from a few. Most are lagging behind where we'd like to see on the national level. And then we have a few laggards that really are not taking energy efficiency serious at all. So this report's going to give you all you need to know, and you'll be able to understand where your utility is, where your utility is in reference to the other utilities in the Southeast, and where we can continue to work as an advocacy community to bring pressure to get better programs available to all customers. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and hopefully everyone will enjoy the report, and we look forward to answering any questions going forward. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the introduction. So as Steve mentioned, I'm Heather Ponen, Energy Policy Manager at the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and I'm also one of the authors of this report, along with Forrest Bradley Wright, who is SACE's Energy Efficiency Director. So for those of you who aren't familiar with SACE, we're a nonprofit that promotes responsible energy choices, responsible and equitable energy choices to ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. And as a leading voice for energy policy in the region, SACE is focused on transforming the way that we produce and consume energy. And so one of the things that is changing about the way that we produce and consume energy is energy efficiency, which is the topic of today's webinar. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide. So the content of this webinar is based on SACE's latest Energy Efficiency in the Southeast report, which documents recent trends in energy efficiency programs offered by electric utilities. Oh, sorry, could we move to the next slide? But over the next hour, we're going to describe both utility and state trends and identify the policies and practices that impact adoption of energy efficiency as a resource for those utilities. Now, this report looks at each utility's energy efficiency savings as a % of prior year retail sales. This metric is widely used in states that set energy efficiency resource standards, but it's also a practical way to compare different size utilities. So the savings that you're going to see throughout the report and webinar use two primary sources. One is annual reports that utilities are required to file by state regulators in order to get approval to recover costs for energy efficiency programs. For the most part, these data sources do align with other federal data sources, such as EIA, but in known cases where they do not, we rely on the utility filings instead. However, for many smaller utilities that don't report to regulators, we use EIA Form 861. And another quick note is that since the latest available EIA data covers the 2019 calendar year, it does not give us hard numbers on efficiency performance during the pandemic. But we're still going to give specific examples on how programs have been impacted later on in the webinar. Okay, so can we move to the next slide, please? So we're first going to look at the performance of different regions in the country and how the Southeast looks in context. So as you can see from both the map and the table, the South, and more specifically the Southeast, has a much lower level of savings than the rest of the country. In fact, it usually comes dead last in the rankings. So as a result, the average in the Southeast is actually just half of the national benchmark. And so this really trails the rest of the country, with the Midwest, the Western Pacific region, and the Northeast all delivering annual savings that are several times higher than the Southeast. Another quick note is that when we refer to the Southeast or Southeastern utilities, we're talking about a specific grouping here, which is marked in green on the map. So we're talking about utilities that do not participate in interstate electricity markets, such as PJM or MISO, and that's mostly because they're regulated differently. So again, that part highlighted in green on the map, you're going to see that referred to as Southeastern utilities throughout the report. And since this map is based on more general regions, you can't quite see individual state performances, but we're going to go ahead and look at that in the next slide. So now we're looking at how each individual state stacks up relative to its size. On the higher end of the spectrum, there are just 3 states that exceeded the regional average, and that's Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And in particular, North Carolina continues to be the only state in the Southeast that approaches, or in the case of previous years, exceeds the national average. But moving down in the rankings, you can see that Florida and Mississippi are kind of grouped together, essentially tied, and they're at a level that's about half the regional average. After that, there's a fairly steep drop off, with Alabama and Tennessee being closer to 0 than the regional average. But now we're gonna shift focus here, and we're actually gonna start to look at things at the utility level. So we're gonna move to the next slide, where we're mainly looking at investor-owned utilities. Okay, can we move to the, okay, thank you. So we have 11 utilities on this slide, as well as the US average and the regional average. But one thing that you should keep in mind as we look at these rankings is that even above the national average, 1% of prior year retail sales is kind of a symbolic benchmark for high achieving utility energy efficiency programs. And to date, Duke Energy Carolinas is one of the only utilities in the Southeast that has ever exceeded that benchmark. This year, they fell just short, but in the past 2 years, they did narrowly exceed that 1%. Duke Energy Progress, also operating in North and South Carolina, hasn't quite reached that benchmark yet, but you can see that they're still well above the next major utility. And so the next grouping of utilities in the middle is Georgia Power, Tampa Electric, and Dominion, South Carolina. So all 3 of those utilities exceeded the Southeast regional average, but they did fall short of the national average. And next, we're gonna go back to Duke for a minute. So Duke Energy Florida, one recurring theme that we see across many of our reports is that there's always this gap between the Duke companies operating in the Carolinas and the Duke company in Florida. So this is mainly chalked up to state policy differences. And in this case, it just means far lower savings for Duke Energy Florida at 0.19% this year. But apart from that, many other major utility systems in the Southeast are kind of underperforming. In particular, I'm going to highlight the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA. and Florida Power and Light. So those are actually two of the largest utilities in the Southeast, yet they're actually the ones driving regional energy efficiency savings downwards. So to underscore that last point, we're going to look at the next slide, and we're going to see how these utility systems contribute to both total Southeast savings and total Southeast retail sales. So basically seeing who makes up the largest piece of the pie in each category. So in this graph, the left column, we can see that the retail sales in the region are more or less evenly divided among the major utility groups. However, when we look at total savings on the right, there are a couple of things that stand out. One is that Duke utilities account for well over half the savings in the Southeast on their own. There are multiple reasons for this success that Forrest is going to go over in a little bit. But the next largest contributor to savings is Southern Company. And they're more or less equal to their share of regional electricity sales and savings. But since Southern Company is made up of 3 operating companies, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and Alabama, there's actually quite a bit of difference in the performance in that grouping of utilities that we're going to go into in a little bit. But finally, to contrast, TVA and NextEra are 2 of the largest utilities in the region, but they actually come out at the bottom of the list on the right-hand column for total savings. And even though TVA's share of electricity sales is almost as large as Duke's, TVA only contributes 1% of all energy efficiency savings in the Southeast. And not much better, but NextEra has 15% of total electricity sales, but only 3% of efficiency savings. So again, these large utilities are doing a lot to drag down the regional average. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Forrest, who's going to give an in-depth look at a lot of the utility systems listed here, starting with Duke.
Well, thank you, Heather. You've already heard that Duke is the regional leader, has consistently been, and that there is nevertheless a gap between the performance of Duke in the Carolinas and in Florida, very much chalked up to the different state policies that drive the utilities' deployment of efficiency. So we will talk a bit more later on about changes that may be coming in Florida on the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act. But you can plainly see that the policies in Florida result in vastly lower savings for a company that has proven its ability to perform at a much higher level. So again, if you look across the years, you see that Duke in North and South Carolina, Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas here, have sustained savings over time. And this despite the fact that there are regular changes in the baselines against which utility efficiency savings are measured. So changes in codes and standards can actually erode efficiency savings potential. But the utility has had a very flexible approach to their overall efficiency portfolios, regularly bringing forward new program concepts, modifying existing programs, deploying through different delivery channels, and reaching towards additional customer segments. All of this has been supported by a very robust collaborative working group of stakeholders that SACE and many others are a part of, and ultimately leading to a rolling set of proposals going into the commissions in North and South Carolina. In just the last year or so, there have been proposals on expanding residential new construction, bringing financing to small businesses, deploying more through midstream channels, and also programs that target winter peak. So as Heather noted earlier, COVID was a huge factor in 2020, and the pandemic in March ground programs across the country to a halt. Duke was one of the first major utilities in the Southeast to implement new safety protocols and make delivery changes allowing them to resume operations, and they have reported being on track to reach their previously projected 2020 savings goals. So certainly a significant accomplishment in a very challenging time. Again, policy is a huge factor in utility efficiency performance, and there are many potential changes on the horizon and policies that could drive additional efficiency savings. I touched on briefly Florida's Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act rule, which is being revised at this moment. In North and South Carolina, there have been changes in the cost benefit test that is being used, a shift from the total resource cost test to the utility cost test for better symmetry, as well as a change in the performance mechanism that could drive additional low-income energy efficiency. Additionally, in both North and South Carolina, there have been significant changes and new requirements around integrated resource planning that include a greater focus on coal requirements, on emissions reductions, and analyzing higher levels of efficiency and renewable energy. So all of those will be things to watch and could be drivers of more efficiency savings in the future. Next slide, please. So next slide, our next utility is Dominion, South Carolina. Formerly South Carolina Electric and Gas was acquired by Dominion following the collapse of the VC Summer Nuclear Power Plant project. And what we saw after that acquisition in 2019 was a commission approval to roughly efficiency savings from previous levels. So 2019 figures that you see here would predate those going into effect. And so savings are expected to rise going forward. Again, 2020 was an unexpectedly challenging year. So we'll see where that does play out ultimately for Dominion. But there was another interesting development in 2020 when the utilities application for their integrated resource plan was rejected by the South Carolina Public Service Commission. And this is a pretty dramatic development. It's not very often that you have commissions reject integrated resource plans as they did here. And they really pushed back on Dominion's claim that the potential study that they had commissioned represented the upper limit of efficiency savings. That just is not the case routinely. There are conservatisms in potential studies that that cause them to show less savings than are actually achievable. So the commission actually required Dominion to come back with a refiled IRP within 60 days. That'll be coming up in just about a month. And that must include at least 1% energy efficiency savings. So you see on the left, substantially higher than their past performance. But deeper changes are in store before the 2023 IRP, which among other things will involve showing analysis of energy efficiency that go even beyond 1% to 1.25%, 1.5%, 1.75%, and 2%. So we expect to see some very interesting implications as we see more closely how energy efficiency can compete against supply resources. Next slide, please. Southern Company includes Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and Alabama Power. You can see that Mississippi Power is the only one of these three to have had increases in efficiency savings in recent years. They are now in the midst of their very first integrated resource plan under commission oversight, and that could lead to additional efficiency savings in the future. But there's really many more questions right now than certain answers from where we are today. Georgia Power, in its 2019 IRP, was required by the commission to increase savings by 15% in each of the next 3 years. But clearly 2020 did not go as planned. The utility had already been in the process of changing vendors for many of its programs and got a late start to program deployment on account of that. But no one could have foreseen the impacts that COVID-19 has brought. And unfortunately, savings went into a tailspin after March and never fully recovered. So here, and we'll discuss this a little bit more later, you have a contrast between the approach that was taken by Duke and the approach by Georgia Power, which had far more restrictive operating procedures around in-home installations, and just did not reflect the urgency, the flexibility, or the focus on low-income customers that you saw from Duke. There was a bright spot also coming out of the 2019 IRP. Georgia Power proposed a pilot program of pay-as-you-save repayment for comprehensive packages of energy efficiency for low-income customers. So this would allow a deeper set of retrofits for customers that are financially struggling and could see deep savings right away, even as they make repayment for their improvements through their bills. This is the first investor-owned utility in the Southeast to deploy the pay-as-you-save program, and it's something certainly to watch in the coming years for Georgia Power, and potentially to see if we have uptake by other utilities in the region. Next slide, please. So to start, I need to state that efficiency rates in Florida are extremely low to begin with. And this is something that will be discussed later on, certainly related to the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act rules and how they've been implemented. But they're so low, in fact, that utilities usually overshoot them by a considerable degree in their program plans, but not so with NextEra. If you look to the right, you see Florida Power and Light to do literally nothing more than meet minimal requirements. And to put the amount of savings that you see depicted here into perspective, know that Florida Power and Light is 2.5 times larger a utility than Duke, Florida, and 6.5 times larger than Tampa Electric, and yet their savings are in a comparable range. The yellow bars that you see there are the additional savings proposed by the utilities above and beyond the required targets set by the Commission. So clearly, as I noted, the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act rules are broken. Florida Power and Light has historically defended the flawed practices that operate in this state. There will be an opportunity, I hope, for them and other utilities in Florida to encourage the Commission to embrace modern industry standard practices going forward. But a question, another thing to watch. One bright spot, low income energy efficiency was a significant priority for SACE and our co-interveners in the 2019 FICA goal setting process. And Florida Power and Light did propose increasing participation in their low income programs over the next year to triple those. So a small step in the right direction. It is worth noting, though, that historically, Duke has done 20 times more efficiency for low-income customers than Florida Power and Light, and TECO has done 50 times more. So clearly there's still a lot of room to grow there. Next slide, please. While TVA has never been a efficiency leader in the Southeast, in 2018, its near total abandonment of traditional energy efficiency incentives had a huge impact for customers, and it actually drags the regional average down as a whole. From 2018 to 2019, the regional average fell from 0.31% to 0.26%, and almost all of that is attributable to this reduction by Tennessee Valley Authority. Because this and TVA's restrictions on local power companies accessing solar and other less expensive generation, the largest local power company in TVA's region, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, is considering leaving the TVA system. That's a rather earth-shattering development. We shall see where it goes, but it comes down to a recognition that they could meet their power needs less expensively by embracing efficiency and accessing new sources of power generation. There could be big changes on the horizon for TVA. It is the largest public utility. It's federally administered. We have a new administration that has placed a high priority on addressing climate change. And that could translate into new leadership at the Tennessee Valley Authority Board. If the utility embraces the federal administration's new priorities and sought to drive down carbon emissions to make a transition to renewable energy and energy efficiency, you could see Tennessee Valley Authority become a clean energy innovation leader that the rest of the nation could follow. Now that is a big if, but it's certainly consistent with the impacts that we know that the federal administration is looking for on climate priorities, as well as job creation and economic stimulus. So again, something to keep an eye on in the coming years. Next slide, please. As Heather noted earlier, our data is from 2019, does not reflect the impact yet of COVID-19 on efficiency performance in the Southeast. However, there are a lot of implications that we already can observe from what happened in 2020. The first is to acknowledge that the economic downturn has had a devastating effect on those who were financially struggling, even before the pandemic. The high energy bursts and financial vulnerability of millions of households made energy affordability a serious challenge. And that was just made worse with the economic downturn. There were temporary moratoriums on disconnections, which addressed the most immediate needs, but it did not solve the underlying problems. Energy efficiency has an important role to play in serving the heightened need amongst customers. It can help to lower energy bills. It can be paired with bill repayment, and it could be matched as well with some degree of debt forgiveness. Ultimately, there are strategies for deploying these approaches that can actually reduce costs for customers overall, because uncollected bills for the utility are ultimately passed on to all customers and lead to higher costs that all customers must pay. So as I mentioned earlier, in March, energy efficiency ground to a halt across the country and in the Southeast. As usual, there were significant differences in utility responses. In order to continue or resume operation of efficiency programs, new safety protocols were required, changes to program strategies, and budget flexibility. These were the tools that would allow a utility to resume delivering efficiency during the very challenging circumstances of the pandemic. And I already described before some of the differences in approach and ultimately, what utilities will be able to achieve for overall savings between Duke and Georgia Power. I do want to make mention, if we look outside the region, we see some other approaches. In Arizona, the commission went quite a bit further than we've seen in the Southeast, approving a major shift in response to COVID. And this meant increased incentives for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, which were easier to provide, even as in-person contact was reduced. A substantial increase in spending per house for income households from $6,000 to $9,000, as well as significant flexibility to move funds from programs that were struggling to perform in current conditions over to those that were able to serve customers. Next slide, please. So here again, we have a handful of states that are delivering the vast majority of savings for the region. North Carolina accounted for 45% of the region's total savings. Florida has over 1/3 of the region's population. It is by far the largest state, and yet it captured less savings than South Carolina, which has just 1/4 of the population. And the effect of TVA slashing its traditional efficiency incentive programs was seen, most heavily in Alabama, where there was a 77% year-over-year drop, and in Tennessee with an 86% decline in efficiency savings from last year. Next slide, please. All right, so the first thing to note here about Florida is the very low state average. At 0.12, it's less than half of the regional average. It's about a fifth of the national average. And the other thing to note is the utility divide here. So below the average is Power and Light and Gulf Power. Above it, all of the other utilities. So you can see, particularly because of its size, how Florida Power and Light has dragged the entire state's average downward. And in fact, again, like TVA, they're a large enough state and a large enough utility to have effect in pulling down the regional average as well. The low performance of Florida's utility efficiency is really attributable to two key policy flaws that only Florida uses. The first of those is reliance on the outdated ratepayer impact measure test, which effectively eliminates the most high-performing efficiency measures, because the way that it works and is treated in Florida is that any reduction in energy waste, so lower bills, is actually counted as a cost rather than a benefit, because it results in lower utility revenues. The second policy that only Florida uses is what's called the 2-year screen. It is meant to address free ridership, but it has no basis in empirical fact. And the way that it operates is any measure that pays back in 2 years or less is immediately eliminated. So again, you're taking the highest performing measures that are the most proven and generally popular around the country, and you're removing them before you even set targets. So now if we look down at the bottom, you can see a timeline of the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act through the years. Started in 1980, but if you look at 1991, 1993, the last time the rules were revised. In 2008, the legislature amended the statute to emphasize the importance of energy efficiency. You saw an increase in savings targets the next year, but the commission took no formal action to codify the new statute in its own rules. So subsequently, in 2014, the commission and utilities slashed savings by 87%. And 5 years later, utilities proposed reducing it down to 99.5% below where it had been in 2019. The commission rejected those proposals, which included some utilities proposing zero goals, and called for rulemaking. So as I said, that is now underway. There really are very large implications for the state and for the region with possible changes to these rules. And as I said before, if we're going to see a change in performance, it is necessarily going to come from Florida embracing more modern and industry standard practices for efficiency with its new rules. Next slide, please. So North Carolina has probably its most interesting development a couple of years ago was Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80 that is aimed to reduce emissions 40% by 2025. That's coming up soon, as additional targets beyond that. There has been a considerable amount of work from the Department of Environmental Quality, as well as an energy efficiency roadmap, clean energy plan, lots of stakeholders involved. And there are a lot of different notions for how those emissions reductions targets could be met. We see the most interesting strategies are those that would lead to a significant increase in renewable energy and energy efficiency. But there is likely to be tension over a shift from legacy coal and gas generation to building new gas generation. So it really does still remain to be seen what impact Executive Order 80 will have on efficiency. But it really cannot be done just by the executive branch. The Utility Commission and all of the state's utilities will need to be a part of achieving those emissions reductions targets. And if you look on the left, again, you can see that Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress are comparatively high performing, while the cooperatives and municipal utilities in the state have not really been a part of that efficiency performance to date. So that would presumably need to be a part of the strategy going forward. Ultimately, I really think there's no way to envision achieving the emissions reductions targets without a substantial portion of that coming from efficiency. I did also mention that North Carolina is one of a number of states that has seen some change in its integrated resource planning requirements, and they do line up with some of the objectives in Executive Order 80 for emissions reductions. Next slide, please. So South Carolina, another very interesting state to watch right now. It has an all new commission following the VC summer nuclear power plant collapse, and the unanimous passage of the Energy Freedom Act in 2019 laid out a set of clean energy policies that are now starting to come to bear. Dominion Energy is the first to bring forward an integrated resource plan following the passage of the Energy Freedom Act. And as discussed earlier, the commission rejected its IRP, and the company is now required to submit higher efficiency savings analysis at 1% and 2% going forward. Also has an integrated resource plan before the South Carolina Commission. I'm sure they're watching the Dominion decision and what follows very closely, as are we. I would say, as we can note, that Duke is by historic performance in a better position, and having a number of strategies for finding new efficiency savings, including with a focus on addressing winter peak, that also I think is consistent with some of the goals of the Energy Freedom Act. Finally, for South Carolina, Santi Cooper, you can see their performance is much lower. They are a somewhat interesting case in that our metric is the energy savings as a percentage of retail sales. They have much larger retail sales than do a customer base because of the other utilities that they serve. I draw a comparison to TVA as it relates to Santi Cooper and their responsibility to do resource planning. So we've seen a lot of activity recently. There are likely some significant changes coming for Santi Cooper and how it does its resource planning. We do hope that efficiency will be a big part of that. Last slide, please. So in conclusion, this is a time of transition for the Southeast, and a lot of it centers around retiring fossil fuels. The Southeast is finally beginning to reckon with its fleet of aging legacy coal and gas plants. We do see already a rush to replace retiring power plants with new gas construction. Unfortunately, those moves would directly undermine investment in energy efficiency, renewable energy that are key to reaching a clean and affordable future. We do also know that the Southeast has among the highest electricity bills in the country and the lowest investment in energy. See, there's a rather clear solution there. By increasing energy efficiency, we can address high energy bills and equitable issues as well. So finally, there are new signs of leadership among local communities, some states in the Southeast, some electric utilities, and now the federal administration that is committed to addressing climate change and prioritizing energy efficiency as a tool to do so. and to bring additional economic prosperity to the country. So energy efficiency is something to watch. We're very excited to release our third annual Energy Efficiency in the Southeast annual report, and welcome your questions.
Great. Thank you, Forrest and Heather, for that. And going to start. We have a number of questions coming in through the Q&A. Just a reminder to type your questions in through the Q&A on the Zoom, and we will get to them as we're able. Hopefully we can get to all of these. So let's start off with a question that says, when you say, and I think Heather, you'll be good to take on this one. When you say energy savings as a % of prior year retail sales, does that mean savings by the average customer? So Heather, if you could just explain that metric a little bit more, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I also noticed that I think there was another question about the metric, and there are a couple of parts to this. To respond to this question, no. So when we say energy savings, we're referring to like the total megawatt hours saved by the entire utilities portfolio. And the reason that we're looking at it at the portfolio level instead of the customer level is because we think that most utilities should be looking at energy efficiency as a resource, and it needs to be included in their planning process, like you would plan to add more solar or wind. So that's one part. I also saw another question asking about if we looked at the dollars spent on energy efficiency programs as a share of total energy sales. So I think that part of the confusion is that we kept saying savings as a % of retail sales, but we're really referring to, again, the energy savings and not the dollar savings.
All right. Thanks, Heather. And next, it looks like we have a question on Georgia Power. Forrest, I'm going to ask you if you can talk about this, and then Heather, if you can chime in as well, because I know you are in Atlanta too. So can you further explain why Georgia Power savings are going down and how the pandemic has affected this?
Certainly. In 2019, the Georgia Public Service Commission approved the Georgia Power Integrated Resource Plan, but they required Georgia Power to increase their annual efficiency savings by 15% per year from what had been the previous savings levels. However, 2020, I think, brought an array of unexpected challenges. From the beginning of the year, Georgia Power had been changing some of the vendors that actually implement their programs. That, of course, was before anyone knew that the pandemic would soon really change everything. But it meant they got a very slow start to rolling out their programs and getting their savings going. That's not unheard of for them in the past. They usually make those savings up as the year goes on. But when the pandemic led to efficiency programs being stopped, Georgia Power actually stopped running their programs and marketing their programs in March, certainly all of the in-home programs. And they had some of the most, I guess you would say, protective or restrictive positions on resuming program operations. So they really would not do any in-home, any in-person contact, even when other utilities were doing so with new safety protocols. So that meant by September, they were only at 27% of their annual target. By November, I believe that was 36%, and it was just clear that they were not going to meet their savings target for this year. Another big factor in play was that they felt they could not shift funds from different program areas, even while there were programs that they wouldn't operate and others that could potentially be increased. They felt that the way that the Georgia Commission decisions read that they were not allowed to, and importantly, that they did not feel that they could roll over savings that were expected in 2020 into subsequent years, or they might make up for lost savings in 2020 in 2021. To be honest, now that that the pandemic is still going, and that means there are still restrictions on program delivery, I think that we need to continue to be concerned that we would see savings come in low for 2021 again, unless some actions are taken by the and anyway, something to talk about. Definitely the savings that were required in the 2019 IRP with a 15% increase have certainly not materialized to date.
Great. Thanks, Forrest. Anything on that you want to add, Heather?
No, I think Forrest handled that great.
Okay. So this next one is for Heather. With calls for more electrification of transportation, household energy, and industrial power use to replace fossil fuels, how do electricity conservation or reduction goals and incentives avoid discouraging such shifts to cleaner energy? Do you want to provide some thoughts on that, Heather, and then we can see if Forrest has anything to say on it as well.
Hold on, can you read that question again?
Yes. So just kind of summarizing electrification, do conservation and reduction goals work hand in hand with electrification, or are those two at odds, or how can they work together?
Oh, I mean, I think that they definitely go together. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different, there's so many different ways to electrify that I think energy efficiency can help in areas where, maybe solar or other types of energy can't. I mean, I think in particular, kind of the timing issue, what time of the day you're using that power, that actually can, that affects, or rather, that affects like how much emissions that's taking up just because of how a utility is supplying power in a given hour. And so I think that energy efficiency helps because it just gives more flexibility.
Okay. Thanks, Heather. All right, we'll move over to South Carolina for now. And this one is, I'll see if you can provide some insights, Forrest. Is the Energy Freedom Act passed by South Carolina a good model for other states to look at? Or are there other states that have better models that you've seen?
That's a great question. And there are a number of components to the Energy Freedom Act. I think I'll just stay focused on the piece related to integrated resource planning and the requirements that led the Public Service Commission to reject Dominion's IRP. There are some very important things in there. One of them is that the utility is required to present a low, medium, and high case for energy efficiency and renewable energy. So that means that you have a more complete picture of what is possible and how the options compare and perform when efficiency is at a higher level is competing with traditional supply, and same with renewable energy, how it's competing with traditional supply. So that is a good development. While I don't have the language immediately in front of me, there's another very important passage was referenced in the commission order that indicated that that integrated resource planning analysis was meant to present the best plan. And you have a lot of instances across the Southeast and other parts of the country where utilities submit their integrated resource plan and the regulators essentially evaluate it for process compliance. Does it have the pieces and parts of a plan that were in the rule? But it doesn't actually ultimately make the decision based on the content based on whether or not that is the best plan for the public. So I think that is a second really important feature of the South Carolina approach, new approach to integrated resource planning that has flowed from the Energy Freedom Act.
Thanks, Forrest. I think we'll probably stick with you on this one, but move north to, move to Duke Carolinas, which covers both of the Carolinas. Duke Carolinas has been the consistent leader, but they seem to be losing ground since 2017. Can you talk about if that can be attributed, what that's attributed to? Have they gotten the low-hanging fruit, or or have they made changes, and what is the driver of that?
Another great question. There really are a number of drivers, and I think it points to a truth in energy efficiency, which is that to maintain high savings, programs and strategies must constantly be evolving. Part of it is because you deliver efficiency savings to customers, and that those needs have been met. And so you need to be reaching new customers beyond that, or getting more savings to customers who have participated before. But I think that it's been changes in codes and standards, particularly if you think of changes in lighting, have happened because of requirements and just market transformation. Lighting savings were a big of Duke's performance in the past, and that side is receding and needs to be filled up with other areas of savings. So I think that is the challenge. There has been a decline in avoided cost, which to be kind of in the technical details. If the cost of power supply is less, then it is harder for energy efficiency to demonstrate cost effectiveness, and some measures may lose cost effectiveness. So those are some of the headwinds, but there are always new technologies that can come in and provide additional savings. Notably, though, they came in at 0.98%. I did analysis last year. I believe that were it not for an increase in retail sales for 2018, rather, then I think you would have seen Duke's savings right at that 1% mark. So that they came in just a bit below was not because of a reduction in that case in efficiency savings, as much as it was an increase in the prior year's retail sales. But again, a great question, and it really gets at the heart of what does it take to be high performing for efficiency. It's constantly adapting and looking for new savings.
All right, thanks, Forrest. 30-second answer on this one. We had a couple of folks comment that shooting for 1% or even 1 to 2% seems pretty low. And what sort of targets should advocates be asking for? And is there a way to go above that? Forrest, Heather, 30-second answer to close us out.
Well, I'll go ahead and say that is per year. A 1% reduction, those can stack up cumulatively. The highest performing states, like those in New England, are at or above 2%. That really is strong performance. So I know the number sounds small, and surely there are higher savings opportunities that should be pursued. But for the Southeast, if we were to be moving as a region towards that 1% and beyond, it would translate into some profound benefits for customers, lower bills, and reducing emissions.
All right. I think we are at time, so we want to end on time for you guys. We had more questions that we weren't able to get to, and I apologize if we were not able to answer your question. Please feel free to follow up with any one of us as the authors, and take a look at our report, and we will send out a recording of the webinar shortly. And thank you all for attending. Have a great rest of your day.